In every corner of the earth, stories are told of kings and warriors, of heroes and villains, of battles won and empires lost. But among these stories, there is one name whispered louder than the rest, one shadow that stands taller than all others. A name that is not just remembered, but feared, admired, and carved into history itself. That name is the GOAT. Long before the chants filled the arenas, before the ground shook beneath the roar of 1,000 voices, there was silence. A silence so heavy it pressed against the hearts of all who dared to dream. In that silence the world was broken, fragile, torn apart by greed and betrayal. Kings fell from their thrones, warriors betrayed their brothers, and the people lived in fear of the powerful who ruled only for themselves. It was in this darkness that the first spark was lit. No one knew his face. No one heard his name, but his presence was felt like the strike of lightning across a black sky. He was not born into greatness. Greatness was forced upon him. Where others saw defeat, he saw the path forward. Where others bent their knees, he stood firm. The child of shadows grew in silence, hidden from the world, but every scar, every fall, and every strike shaped him into something beyond a man. He was becoming a force, the kind of force that history would later call unstoppable. The world tested him early. The storms came, the betrayals came, and every hand that reached out to help him eventually turned against him. But this only forged his fire. They called him cursed, but curses could not break him. They called him lost, but he was not lost. He was waiting, watching, learning. Every scar told a story. Every fight built his legend. When the people whispered of a savior, they were not speaking of gods or kings. They were speaking of him. A man with no crown, no throne, and no need for glory. The one who carried the strength of 1,000 voices and the will of 1,000 battles. The one who would come to be known not as a hero, not as a savior, but as something more. The GOAT. And as the fires of war began to rise again, his time drew near. The world did not know it yet, but their silence was about to be broken. The world had forgotten what true power felt like. Men had traded honor for gold, loyalty for survival, and strength for comfort. The kingdom stood on shaky ground, trembling under rulers who were more concerned with their crowns than their people. But while the world crumbled in the light of day, in the shadows, something unstoppable was taking shape. Something no crown could command and no throne could contain. He did not announce his coming. He did not need to. The ground itself whispered of his steps, and the wind carried the weight of his presence. Those who crossed his path never saw his face, only the trail he left behind, broken chains, fallen tyrants, and whispers that grew into a chant across villages and cities alike. A faceless figure moving like a storm, unpredictable yet certain, carving his name not with words but with actions. His strength was not only in his hands but in his will. When others gave up, he pushed forward. When armies stood in his way, he tore through them not for glory but for justice. Yet justice in his world was never simple. To the weak, he was salvation. To the powerful, he was a nightmare. Every strike he delivered was not only against a man or a beast, it was against a system, a world that had long forgotten what it meant to truly fight for something worth dying for, and the people, the broken masses who had been bent beneath the weight of tyrants, began to rise with him. Not because he asked them to, but because they saw in him the reflection of what they once dreamed to be. Farmers picked up rusted blades, children shouted his name in secret corners, and warriors who had long abandoned their honor swore their loyalty once more. He was faceless, but his facelessness became his power. He was not one man, he was every man. He was the rage of the oppressed, the cry of the forgotten, the fire of the silenced, but greatness never comes without a price. With every battle he fought, new enemies rose. Shadows darker than his own moved against him, whispering in corners, plotting in silence. They called him a threat, a beast, a monster that had to be destroyed before his legend spread too far. And they were right to fear him, for he was not fighting for crowns or for kingdoms. He was fighting to rewrite the very story of what power meant. One night, under a sky torn apart by thunder, his enemies came for him. Armies of men, beasts of iron, warlords with blood dripping from their hands. They came with fire, with rage, with fear of what he represented. And yet he stood. Alone at first, then surrounded by the echoes of every voice he had awakened. The world called it a battle. He called it the beginning dot, because in that storm, when the earth shook and blood stained the ground, something greater than victory was born, not just a legend, but a destiny. And so the Faceless Warrior became more than a story. He became a movement, a force, a living fire that no chains could hold and no army could extinguish. He was not just rising, he was preparing. For the greatest battle was yet to come, and when it did, the world would remember only one name. The goat, Dostoevsky, the rise of the goat, was not a path of glory but of storms. His name, though never spoken by his own lips, carried like wildfire across the lands. To the desperate, he was salvation. To the fearful rulers, he was rebellion in human form. The more his shadow stretched across kingdoms, the more the world began to prepare not to celebrate him, but to test him. For the world does not give legends freely. It forges them in fire, trials, and blood. The trial began not with armies, but with silence. His enemies understood that steel alone could not break him, so they turned to poison. Not poison of the body, but poison of the mind. Whispers spread through the villages. He cannot be trusted. He is no savior. He is a curse. Stories of betrayal were planted like seeds, and doubt grew among the very people who once believed in him. Some turned their backs, some betrayed him for gold, and some sharpened their blades not against tyrants, but against the Faceless One himself, and yet he did not falter. For the goat understood something his enemies never did trust is not given, it is proven. He did not plead with the people to believe him. Instead, he bore the weight of their doubt as he bore the weight of every scar. He fought not for their cheers, but for their future. And slowly, when they saw the world still burning and he alone stood between them and ruin, the whispers began to fade. The fire of his cause burned stronger than the smoke of their lies, but the trial did not end there. It grew darker, sharper, deadlier. For out of the shadows rose figures unlike any he had faced before. Not mere tyrants, but monsters in human skin warlords who thrived on chaos. Mercenaries who had never been defeated, beasts bred only for destruction. They were called the Nine, a brotherhood bound by blood and cruelty, feared even by kings. They came not to rule, but to erase. And their target was the one name that threatened their dominion, the goat. The Nine descended upon him in the dead of night. Their blades gleamed under the pale moon, their footsteps thundered like drums of war. They were more than enemies. They were trials made flesh, each one designed to test not his strength alone, but his soul. Against the first he fought with fury, breaking chains of iron and shattering bone. Against the second he fought with silence, patience, and cunning, striking like the serpent in the grass. Against the third, he was pushed to his knees, blood dripping into the dirt, yet he rose again, fueled not by pride, but by an unbreakable will. And so it went. One by one the Nine fell. But victory was not without cost. His body bore wounds deeper than any before. His spirit carried a weight heavier than the world itself. For every victory left him not in triumph, but in exhaustion, and every scar whispered a question: how much longer can you endure? It was in this darkness, in this relentless storm of trial, that the truth began to reveal itself. Legends are not measured by the battles they win, but by the wars they survive. And the goat, faceless yet unyielding, carried within him something. The Nine, the kings, and the world itself could never understand he was not fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone who could not. When the last of the Nine fell to the earth, silence swept the battlefield. The wind carried no cheers, no chants, only the quiet acknowledgement that something unbreakable still stood. His enemies had thrown their greatest trials, and still he remained. But even in victory he knew this was not the end. This was the beginning of the greatest test of all. For beyond the horizon, a storm larger than any before was gathering. The trial of legends was only a doorway. Beyond it waited destiny. And destiny demanded not just survival, but sacrifice, and so the goat walked forward, scarred yet unshaken, faceless yet unforgettable. For he knew one truth above all: legends are not crowned, they are forged. Asterisk, the world held its breath. After the fall of the Nine, after the endless storms of battle, there was no peace, only the silence before something greater. It was as if the earth itself knew that a reckoning was coming, a reckoning that would decide not only the fate of one man, but of every soul who walked the land. The goat had endured betrayal, fought through shadows, and risen against monsters that kings feared to name. But now, destiny had prepared its final test. Not a trial of chains, not a battle of armies, but a war that would tear open the very fabric of history. On the edge of the horizon, the sky began to split. Clouds of fire swirled with winds of ash, and from that storm came an army unlike any before. Not men, not beasts, but something greater, creations born of fear itself. They were forged from the hatred of tyrants, from the greed of kings, from the broken dreams of generations. They did not march with footsteps, but with thunder, carrying blades that glowed with death, eyes that burned with the hunger of conquest. They were not here to fight. They were here to end. And at their center stood the figure who had been waiting all along, the true enemy, the architect of suffering, the one who had pulled strings behind every shadow. Cloaked in darkness, crowned in fire, he was not a ruler but a god of ruin, a being who demanded not loyalty but worship. His voice shook the sky as he declared, "Legends are illusions. Power belongs only to those who seize it." His words spread like poison, choking the air, breaking the hearts of men who had once dared to believe. Yet, in that suffocating darkness, one shadow did not bend. One figure stood tall against the storm. The goat, faceless as ever, unshaken, unbroken. He did not carry a crown or a throne. He carried the will of every scar, the fire of every voice that had ever whispered his name in hope. He did not answer the dark god with words. His silence was louder than thunder. His defiance was brighter than fire. The battle that followed was not of swords alone. It was a clash of wills, a collision of everything the world had ever known. The enemy's army surged forward like a wave meant to drown hope itself. Yet the goat met them not with despair but with fury. His every strike was a roar of the forgotten, his every movement a cry of the oppressed. And behind him, rising from fear into courage, came the people. Farmers, warriors, children, broken men and women, they all stood. For they understood now, the goat was never one man, he was all of them. He was the strength they thought they had lost. The war raged like the tearing of worlds. Flames lit the sky, the earth split under the weight of battle, and the cries of the fallen became the song of the living. The goat clashed with the dark god in a storm of steel and fire, every strike shaking the heavens. He was pushed down, bloodied, scarred beyond measure, but he rose again. He always rose, for this was not about survival anymore. This was about ending the cycle. And in the final moment, when the enemy raised his hand to crush him, the goat unleashed the truth of his power. Not a weapon, not a spell, not a crown. His power was sacrifice. He poured his strength not into himself, but into the people who stood with him. His fire became their fire. His will became their will. And together they rose as one, 1,000 voices, 1,000 hands, 1,000 hearts beating with the strength of one name. The dark god fell. The storm broke, the earth grew still. And when the smoke cleared, the people searched for the one who had led them, but he was gone, vanished into the silence from which he came. No face remained, no body, no throne. Only the legend. From that day, no one knew if the goat still walked among them, hidden in the shadows, or if he had given himself fully to the fire that saved them. But they did not mourn. They chanted, they remembered. They passed down the story of a faceless warrior who rose from nothing, fought against everything, and gave more than his life to rewrite the fate of the world. And so the legend lived on, not in temples, not in palaces, but in the hearts of the people. For the goat was never a man to be worshipped. He was a force to be carried forward. A truth carved into history, that greatness is not born, it is made. Not for glory, not for crowns, but for all dot, and in the silence of every dawn when the wind stirs the ashes of yesterday, you can still hear it. A whisper, a chant, a promise that will never fade. Goat, goat, goat.